Here I want to show you how you can protect your API workflow. API workflow are performed server-side, so it's secure and asynchronous. First, you go into your setting tabs and you enable workflow API and backend workflow. Here you have your workflow API route. Okay, then you go on your backend workflow tab, you click on new general API workflow. You call it, this is my endpoint. By default, expose as a public API workflow is checked. We're gonna uncheck that. I use detect request data because it's easier. I will use Postman. So I include a header and detect data. So now I can use here the endpoint to initialize the call, send. Okay, so now it says workflow not found test out. Why? Because this is my first protection. Expose as a public API workflow is unchecked. If I don't want my API, my endpoint, sorry, be visible by the outside. So this is the first, if you don't need to allow this endpoint to be called by the outside, you uncheck that. So now we will check that. I initialize my workflow, endpoint successfully initialized. I have all my data here, included headers. Okay, for the test, for test purpose, I have created an action, create a new debug. So each time the endpoint is called, we will create this thing, text1, create from Postman. Okay, we can see it just here. Now we will try. My endpoint is exposed as a public API, and this workflow can be run without authentication is unchecked. Okay, what happened? So I remove initialize. What happened if I call this endpoint? It says, okay, it says that it's unauthorized. So my endpoint is effectively protected. You can see the workflow didn't run. So now how can I trigger this workflow with an authentication? First one, you can create an API token. You go on settings, generate a new API token, call it test, copy it, open Postman. Here you put a parameter. Here you put a parameter API token and you put this token. And now if I send, okay, success, we can see that create from Postman, it works. The workflow runs. Okay, this is one way to do that, but when you set up a private key, this API key gives access to your user, full access, full admin access, like you on your editor. So it's really risky, but it can give full access if you want. Okay, another way to do that is to sign up user by creating a sign up endpoint with an action, sign up the user, okay? You send email and password, okay? So here, when you set up the endpoint with the action, sign the user up, here I have already initialized it. Here, if I send an email and a password, send. Okay, success. You can see here into users. So here I have my email, my user created. So here, this is the response from Bubble, from the sign up action. And the user can use this token as a bearer token. So here I remove the API token from before. Okay, we can test unauthorized. But if I go into authorization here into bearer token and put my token here and send the request. Okay, success, the workflow runs. The same way, your user can log in into your app, retrieve this API token and use it to make requests. So this is two ways that you can run your API workflow with authentication. So now, for example, if you want to retrieve some webhooks from Stripe, for instance, you have to check this box because Stripe will not authenticate himself into your app. You have the first technique to include API token, the parameter API token into the Stripe, into your endpoint and give it to Stripe. It is better than doing nothing, but putting an API token into a URL, it's not really secure, but it is better than doing nothing. So you can use this API token into your endpoint and give it to Stripe. Another way to protect your workflow without authentication, instead of putting the API token into the URL, you can put a condition here into request data, and you look for into the header for example, an IP. Stripe provides a list of IP number where webhook come from. Okay, let me show you. I have initialized a new request. Here I have put into my header IP 123. Okay. So now if I send a request here with this condition, request data headers IP is 122, send. The condition for the workflow test is not met, so the workflow won't run. Okay. So now if into my header I have 122, success, I have created one thing. So this is another way to protect your workflow when you can authenticate a user.